Welcome to Brands on Tap, the podcast where we discuss all things brand related.
So whether you're a business owner, industry expert, or simply interested, this podcast is for you.
Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Brands on Tap. Today's talk is just going to be with me to talk about print and the ever-evolving changes within the print industry and how it relates to an ever-increasing digital world. So in this talk, I'm going to be talking about like the nuances of different print techniques, different color variants as well, different substrates, different binding techniques and such like, and the relevance of print within this current climate. So an ever evolving, as we say, changing digital world that we enter. So yeah, that's the talk today on Brands on Tap. So what is the tangible impact of print? In essence, it's more of a sensory thing. Because it's a sensory thing, as opposed to digital, where you may be obviously touching on a screen, if it's on a mobile or tablet, for instance, having something physical in your hands aids the sensory senses in your brain. And that aids the retention of that information. So as you're reading it and holding it, there is overwhelming evidence to suggest that that information stays in your brain longer than it does for picking up something that's digital. So yeah, that's one of the main benefits of having print. It's the sensory side of things and the retention of information. Certainly more beneficial in print than it is compared to digital. So interestingly, 80% of people in recent studies found that by looking at printed media, that they find it more trustworthy than digital content. And I guess there is that belief that when you're looking at something that's been printed, there's been a lot of work involved in the background. So there's been a copywriter generally putting the copy together. And that whole process of researching and creating the content tends to be more trustworthy in print than it does in digital forms. So that's one of the advantages, or one of the main advantages of having print, is that trustworthiness. So if you want to create a brand that you definitely want to gain trust with your target audience, having something that's printed would certainly aid that. It's not to say that you do that in isolation, but certainly doing that in conjunction with some digital media would certainly help your target audience to feel that trust with your brand. So another great advantage of print is the engagement rate. So for instance, on digital media, a typical response rate would be 0.12%, where conversely, with printed media, say a direct mail campaign, for instance, it's 4.4%. So sometimes it is more advantageous to actually have a printed direct mail campaign, for instance, than it is to do a digital campaign. So not everything needs to be digital, and sometimes combining that with print to help increase your engagement rate overall would certainly help. So one of the other advantages of print is to lessen fatigue of screens, basically. We're all guilty of it, especially me in my job, in front of a screen for quite often 8 or 9 hours plus per day. So having something that is physical in your hands and just breaking away from the screen will certainly help lessen the fatigue of just viewing a screen all the time. So whether that's a break from mobile or tablet devices or desktop screens, it's just nice to just pick up a magazine, a book, or printed collateral, and just lessen your screen fatigue throughout the day. So whether you do that, just a general break throughout the day, or whether you get home and you break from the screen and you do some reading, for instance. So yeah, just lessening that fatigue certainly will help. So it's a misconception that with printed media, you can't narrow down the demographics. You can do that. There's a lot of data structures out there that you can tap into that will help you narrow down the demographic, even down to specific postcodes. So for direct mail campaigns and door drops and the like, you can certainly narrow down the demographic as you can with digital media. Obviously, with digital media, it is narrowed down a bit more than printed media, but certainly if you wanted a slightly wider target audience, you can still achieve that with printed collateral and direct mail, for instance. So certainly don't rule that out as part of your marketing mix when you're trying to reach different target audiences. It's still a very good media in this day and age. So in this next section, we're going to be talking about print versus online media. So what are the benefits, what are the pitfalls of both? So yeah, that's going to be a nice introduction into what those are really, those differences. So in this digital age, obviously the retention of information is really important. So as I touched on earlier, the retention rate of printed collateral is between 70 and 80% on recent studies, compared to 10 to 30% maximum on digital content. So obviously, if you want to try and get your information across to your target audience, print really is a great media to do that. Surveys reveal that people still prefer to have printed media when having lots of information to digest. So like books, magazines, for instance, people still prefer to pick up a physical book or magazine. So in our business, if we're trying to get across short snippets of information to our clients or our clients' target audience, then we would use digital media for that purpose. Whereas if we're trying to get through especially technical information, a lot of technical information, then we would generally put that into print in a brochure, magazine, or whatever. But certainly a printed collateral for lots of information that you need to digest. Certainly the printed form will work harder for you than digital media. So one thing that sometimes can be better in the printed form is experiential marketing. So it's things like in printed media, you can have pop-ups, pull-outs, these kind of things, messages that appear in places that you wouldn't expect them to. With you can even have direct mail that instantly pops up as soon as you open the envelope, things like that. So that experiential kind of marketing, certainly that interaction with that piece of collateral, certainly more engaging than sometimes you see with digital content. So yeah, certainly don't rule that out in your marketing mix. It's not to say that you don't do digital, but certainly you can mix it in with some printed collateral, and you can certainly get that experiential marketing message across in print. So we would certainly encourage that. So the next subject I want to tackle is the different types of print, from digital presses to offset presses and the like. So I'll go into each element of those in a little bit more detail and explain the differences. The first one I want to mention is digital printing. We tend to use HP Indigo presses for our digital print, mainly because the print quality is very good and almost comparable to lithographic printing. I nearly said that wrong, but lithographic, I think. So digital printing is normally used for short run printing. Some digital presses will also allow you to have white opaque ink as well. So sometimes if you're printing onto dark substrates that you want to have white text on top, sometimes digital printing is the right way to go. Digital presses also allow you to have special varnishes as well on top. So it's very similar to lithographic printing, but it's more, I would say, used for the lower end short run type printing. So if quality is an issue for you, then I would Whereas the digital printing, to the trained eye, you can tell the difference, but to the average person, you wouldn't be able to tell. So yeah, certainly digital media is very good for low-end print, as I say, for smaller quantities. Typically, you would see offset and lithographic printing for larger runs and for higher quality. Even fine art prints and things, some of them are done using that process. So most magazines, brochures, catalogues, that type of thing are used or produced using offset lithographic printing. The quality is very good. You tend to print at 300 dpi as well. You can print higher. So DPI stands for dots per inch. So it's how many little dots within a square inch there are. So obviously the more dots per inch there are, the higher resolution the print reproduction is. And so offset printing is certainly the way to go if you want high quality printing. And that's the kind of type of printing method that we tend to use for most of our print collateral, for brochures, for folders and that type of thing, and for stationery, for catalogues. And that is the general multi-purpose print technique, if you like, for most of the design industry. Another form of print method is large format printing. So this is ideal for printing banners, posters, large scale posters, wraps and that type of thing for vehicles and that type of thing. So it's a lot larger, wider form of printing, the quality of which is these days is very good. It used to be in the old days that the resolution was relatively poor compared to lithographic printing, mainly because the dots per inch didn't need to be that high, because generally you stood further away from the printed media. Whereas now the resolution of large format printing is much higher and is often printed even higher dots per inch than lithographic printing. So yeah, the advantages of large format printing, as I say, is for use in large scale prints. So whether that is banners, that type of thing, even for use on exhibition panels and stands. So that's generally where you'd use large format printing. Another form of print technique is screen printing, commonly used for things like merchandise, some banners, things like that. The technique itself is basically ink being pushed through a mesh silk screen. So yeah, hence silk screen printing. So the benefit of it is that generally the inks last for a long period of time. So it's very good for outdoor use. So you see a lot of companies use it, as I say, for outdoor signage and the like. It's also used predominantly in the printing of t-shirts as well, for motifs front and back on t-shirts. So yeah, that's the commonest form, I would say, of print technique, mainly for signage and for merchandise and for clothing. So yeah, that's screen printing. Another area of print technique is 3D printing. Now, this has come on leaps and bounds over the years, recent years in particular, where you can now buy your own sort of even home 3D printer. And a lot of these 3D printers are fed different substrates, essentially. So different types of plastics and molecules to create 3D objects. So the advantage of 3D printing now, especially for prototype companies, where engineering firms and the like, they can now produce 3D models on screen and then have those models produced in-house using 3D printing machines. So whereas in the old days, they would have to send their 3D model designs off to another company who might have to build molds and the like. and produce tooling to create 3D prototypes. So the advantage now obviously is time and cost. That whole 3D modeling, having something physical in your hand as a prototype now, the cost has come right down. There are companies now even buying these 3D printers to mass produce objects as well. So that whole industry has really taken off over recent years as the cost of the equipment has come down. So no doubt you'll see more and more of that coming as time proceeds. So yeah, watch this space. Now I'd like to give you an overview of print techniques from flexography to lithography and to sheet-fed presses. And talk about the differences between the three really. So the first one I want to talk about is sheet-fed versus web-fed. So web-fed, nothing to do with spiders. Yeah, basically web presses are presses very similar to sheet-fed presses in terms of their offset presses generally. And they're normally, the web presses are fed with reels of paper. So the paper comes on enormous reels, like toilet paper, but it just in massive forms. So generally these rolls of paper get fed through the press, and with each individual color, normally CMYK, so cyan, magenta, yellow, and K stands for key, which is black, and that's fed through the machine. And so all the colors are laid down on top of each other. It comes out the other end, and there are multiple different types of web presses that can have different attachments on the end as well. So you'll often see the end of a web press, there'll be collators, so they'll basically cut. There'll be guillotines at the end as well, so they cut the sheet as it comes out the end of the press. They'll all be collated, and then it'll be folded and stapled together, and then cut again into a finished object. So yeah, the roll of paper goes in, and you're pretty much going to get almost a complete document at the end of it. So whereas sheet-fed presses are individual sheets that have already been pre-cut, going through the press, and that for us as a business, a graphic design type business, printing brochures and that type of thing, it's normally sheet-fed presses that we generally use. So individual sheets go in, and it's a standalone machine. Same type of thing happens where you've got generally these days with CMYK inks going down, so cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, going down as the sheet goes through the press, and then the sheet comes out the other end with the printed image on the sheet. But what doesn't happen, you don't have the attachments on the end of it. So at the end of that process, all those sheets will be allowed to dry, and some of the sheet-fed presses do have drying units on the end though, so the sheets are pretty much dry once it comes to the end. And then it can be taken away to guillotine machines, folding machines, stapling machines, you name it, to finish the product off. So that's the general difference. So sheet-fed is basically individual sheets going through the press, and web-fed is basically rolls of paper. Lithography is another print technique, and it's the technique uses oil and water in essence. And it's the mainstay of the print use that we typically use for printing brochures, catalogues, and stationery forms, documents, you name it. So one of the other advantages is that you can get a high resolution using lithography print techniques. So a lot of fine art print is done using this technique. So yeah, lithography is kind of the mainstay for us as a graphic design business for the technique that we use. Another common use of print technique is flexography, commonly used in packaging, mainly because it uses a flexible plate system, and this then allows you to print on different substrates, mainly on different types of plastics and cardboard materials. So that's the main advantage really for using flexography, mainly in packaging, as I say. Another area that I'd like to just give you a brief overview on is sort of print finishes and techniques. So from debossing to foiling and things like this. So these techniques enhance the printed collateral, basically, just make it a bit more unique and a bit different. So one of the areas that I'd like to talk about in terms of print techniques and things is about coatings. So the coatings can be in terms of a varnish, which is generally applied either through the printing process in line after the CMYK colours have been laid down. You find some presses have got a varnishing unit at the end, not all, and some are done separately afterwards. So if it's not varnished, it can be laminated after the piece has been printed. So different types of laminate, the common ones, gloss, obviously nice and shiny surface, matte, more subdued kind of surface. And there are also other ones out there like soft touch or velvet laminate or peach laminate you often hear. They're very similar, I think, just given different names. And like peach laminate, it is like the name suggests, the surface will end up feeling like a peach. So if you're trying to produce something that you want to protect, that's one of the advantages of having lamination, is that you can protect all the printed collateral underneath the laminate. So it protects it from marks and scuffs and things like that, but also becomes more tactile as well. So especially the peach and velvet laminates and the matte laminate, as you pick up the item, it certainly feels nice to touch, and it's certainly one of the techniques that we adopt. So more commonly now you'll see mainly matte or gloss laminates being used. Cost wise, they're roughly the same, so it's just down to personal preference. We generally don't use gloss unless we need the substrate underneath, the printed collateral, to really pop. As you can imagine, with a gloss overlay, whether it's a varnish or whether it's a laminate, it really does help to enhance the colours, especially on imagery and the like. So if you want a more subtle effect, then we would certainly recommend matte or one of the velvet or peach type laminates, because that will subdue the colours a little, and not to the point where it looks really flat. It's still quite vibrant, but not as vibrant as the gloss finishes. Another fantastic print technique, and one that I've used personally many a time, is embossing or debossing. And the advantage of using that technique is if you're embossing, essentially you're raising elements out of that sheet. So, and debossing conversely is obviously pushing elements into the sheet. So as you run your hand over the printed collateral, it's either going to feel bumpy if it's embossed, or debossed will feel little dips in the paper or the substrate. And this is a really nice technique if you just want to enhance certain elements, because as you catch it in certain lights, you will see little outlines and little indentations in the marketing collateral. And we've used it on high-end pieces for clients such as, Princess Yachts, Wano, and the like. So, yeah, we use that if we want to really enhance something and give it some sort of class and a real tactile feel, really. So that's the advantage of using embossing and debossing. Obviously, there's a cost to that, as there is with most print techniques or additional print techniques such as lamination and things. But if you certainly want to enhance a document after it's produced, then this is a very good way of doing that. Another thing you can do with a piece of printed collateral for print finishes is using hot foil stamping. So using a foil, like the name suggests, is like tin foil in essence, but microscopic thin, is really thin, and basically it gets hot stamped. So basically it gets pressed into the substrate that you want the foil to stick to. So a die needs to be made in the shape of whatever you want your object to be foiled. So typically it might be elements of a logo, for instance. Say you got some swirl and you want that to be metallic looking. So using a foil, a hot stamp foil, would certainly be the technique to use to do that. And the advantages of the foil, it can go on top of lamination or on top of any varnishing or something like that. So it's on the top surface of the substrate. Doesn't have to be, it can be done first and then laminated over the top. But if you really want that metallic element to stand out, then certainly having it done is the last resort at the very end. Will certainly help to enhance that element. So there are many different types of coloured foils as well. Typically, the most common ones you'll see are obviously gold coloured or silver coloured, but there are a multitude of different coloured foils. So we'd certainly recommend that if you want something just to pop. Generally done on covers of brochures and things like that for high-end brochures. But can be used on stationery. We've done it in numerous different places, mainly for high-end clients. So that's typically where you would use hot foil stamping. I touched on it a bit earlier, but varnishing is another common technique. Sometimes it's in line on the press, so it can be done at the same time. And yeah, the advantage of it is it sometimes can help seal in the, especially the image area of a printed sheet. So if you're worried about marking, a lot of fingerprints going on to recently printed collateral, then certainly varnishing it will help to seal that image. Generally, print companies have a sealer anyway that will help aid that technique, but you can also have a separate varnish on top, and that will aid. You can have a gloss varnish or a matte varnish typically, and again, as we mentioned, like with a laminate, you can either make an image pop or you can make it look slightly subdued. So that's the advantages really of varnish. But if you want something to really feel tactile, then lamination would be the way to go. The next area of print that I wanted to cover is to give you a brief overview of print binding. And there are various different types, from saddle stitching to spiral binding to case binding and more, really. So there's different type of binding techniques, mainly for brochures and catalogues and the like. So yeah, I'll go through that in a bit more detail. The most common type of print binding that we tend to use anyway is saddle stitching. It sounds weird, saddle stitching. You think saddle, horse, you think stitching, sewing, but actually it means two wires applied, generally two wires, and those wires are staples. So yeah, if you hear saddle stitched brochure or catalogue, generally it means a stapled brochure or catalogue, and that's the most common technique really. The disadvantages of saddle stitching is, as you can imagine, that the staples have got to go through multiple pages. So there's only a certain amount of pages that saddle stitching will allow you to have. So typically you'd get to maybe 30 odd pages, and then you might start to look at other print techniques like perfect binding or something similar to that PUR binding. So yeah, generally saddle stitching is two staples in the spine of the book or brochure catalogue, and is the most common form that we generally use in graphic design for most of our clients. So yeah, that's one technique. I mentioned a second ago about saddle stitching or stapling, if you like. Another common technique is perfect binding. Perfect binding is where you print the inner sections of the catalogue or brochure, normally multiple pages. So it would need to be at least 36 pages generally to produce a brochure, or more pages to produce a brochure or catalogue that would use perfect binding technique. And essentially you would print the inner sections, bind them, normally with a glue edge, and then you would then produce the cover separately, and then adhere that to the outside of the bound inner pages. So yeah, basically it gets stuck round the outside of the inner section and is basically glued to the spine of the inner section. And that's called perfect binding. It's the most typical form of binding for things like magazines, for instance. So we've used it multiple times. As I say, generally when you get over 36 pages, especially if those pages are on a heavier weight stock, you would generally use perfect binding as that technique. If it's a lesser weight stock or type of paper, then you would generally use saddle stitching to hold it all together. Another, well, there's two types of other type of binding in this kind of technique really, and that's spiral binding and cone binding. You've probably used cone binding yourself, putting together proposal documents or something in your daily life at work. But typically for manuals, catalogues, that type of thing, more technical bits of information, you would often see spiral binding. Spiral binding is essentially a wire, like you typically would see in a calendar, for instance, at the top edge. You would generally see spiral binding for that kind of technique. So it's a way of binding the sheets together. We've used it a few times, not necessarily for technical documents. We've used it just to be a bit different, really. And it is quite nice to see. You can get different colours as well for the spiral binding itself, for the wire. So that's quite an interesting thing to do sometimes if you want a document just to stand out and pop, if you like. Then spiral binding is another good technique to do that. So, and whereas cone binding is generally used for internal documents that you might see. So for proposals and manuals for internal staff, that type of thing. So that's typical usage for that. Another binding technique, binding method I touched on earlier is case binding. So typically a hardback cover book is done using this technique. So we've done brochures, especially for high-end customers, where we might print a case using a printed technique, offset printing, print the cover sheet, if you like, which is normally done on a thinner weight, and then it's glued to a heavier weight board, so the thickness of like a hardback cover, if you like. So it adhered to that board, so it's all stuck on, and then that board is then adhered to the spine of the internal pages of the book. So obviously the finished item, it's very tactile. It feels like a quality book. And this is why personally I prefer hardback books to paperbacks. It just feels like a more quality item. You can also flourish case binding as well by including the inside cover, if you like, front and back. You can cover it just with a material. You can cover it with printed collateral as well. So if you want a message on the inside, you can have that printed and stuck on, as you quite often see on hardback cover books. Or, as we've done multiple times for high-end clients, you might want to use a material, and you can wrap the material around the hardback cover material, the thick card, if you like, and wrap that completely around front and back and inside. And that's a really nice technique as well. So as you're picking it up, again, if you're using the cloth material, it feels very tactile. And we've also, with case binding, we've also had etched plates embossed into it. We've had foils on top. We've had like white ink applied and things like that. So if you want a quality document or quality item, if you like, then case binding is certainly the way to go. But as with perfect binding and PUR binding, there is a certain thickness that it needs to be, otherwise the thing doesn't stay together. So typically, again, you're talking, if it's a thicker weight paper inside in the text section, you're going to need at least 32 pages or more. So we would recommend 50 to 60 pages as a minimum in order to do a hardback case bound book. So that's the kind of a big advantage, really. It just feels more tactile, feels quality. The flourishes that you can add to it as well. You can add what's called head and tail bands as well. And these, if you look at quality books, sometimes you'll see this in the spine of the book. If you open up the cover, don't open it backwards fully, but you will see in the spine it creates a little arc, and sometimes you will see like a little ribbon on the top where the edge of the text section has been glued to the spine, and there'll be a little ribbon at the top. And again, you can buy different colors, different types of material as well for the head and tail bands. You'll see it top and bottom of the spine. And again, this just adds another nice detail. You can also have a ribbon applied into the spine. You quite often see this in a diary where it's a placeholder type ribbon that can be applied as well. And again, this is all part of the case binding technique. So if you want a quality item that feels very tactile, case binding is certainly the way to go, especially if you've got a high-end client. Sorry, I've just taken a quick break. I'm back again now. But what I wanted to discuss with you now is paper types and paper weights. So there's different types of paper types, such as the gloss, which is much more shiny, coated stock, which is very good for images that you want to zing on your printed collateral. There's a matte coated stock. And again, that feels like it's still quite tactile. The images look a bit more subdued on the paper. And similar to that is a silk stock as well. Again, it's another coating, but feels more like silk, as the name suggests. And then there's uncoated stock. The uncoated stock has got no coating on it at all. So it's just the natural fibers of the paper. We tend to use this for things like premium brands, or for brands that want to come across as very friendly and personable. So it's very tactile stock. So we certainly recommend that stock for a lot of our clients who are very friendly, personable companies, basically, that we deal with. So on the uncoated stock, and also on a lot of the papers now, you can get recycled paper. So, and the recycled paper comes in many different forms, but as the name suggests, it is recycled. So if people are very eco-friendly, You can also have little imprints on your printed collateral as well to say that it is printed on recycled paper. So again, if you want to come across as very conscious of the environment as a brand, we certainly would recommend recycled paper. So there are textured papers as well, and some of these textured papers can be used for like case binding on hardback books. But they can also be used for invites and things like that, mailers. So they can have different textures on them. So again, they feel very tactile, quite friendly, and just something a bit different than you would ordinarily see in the norm with printed collateral. So that's another type of material. You can also get like metallic type papers, pearlescent papers. So don't think when you're doing printed collateral that it has to be kind of just normal, either a silk or a gloss stock. You can use different substrates if you like, and different textures to enhance your printed piece, which might be more engaging for your target audience. The next thing I wanted to discuss is paper weights. So typically, like your copier paper, things like that will be roughly around 80 grams to 120 grams. The grams is GSMs, which stands for grams per square meter. So the lighter the number, or lesser the number, I should say, the lighter the paper stock. So if you want something to feel quite light, then you would go around the sort of 80 gram. Below that, you don't normally use unless you're doing bulk mailers where you need to keep the weight down in terms of postage. So sometimes, like you might get a garden centre pamphlet through the door, for instance, that might be printed on 50 or 60 gram, or sometimes less. And that keeps the overall weight down, which obviously is cheaper for the postage. But generally speaking, like your letterheaded paper that you put through the copier and things like that, you are talking between 80 and 100 gram. You go above that if you want to do things like mailers or leaflets or something like that. You might typically go up to say 170 gram on a coated stock. But if you want something to feel quite like a premium quality, then you would generally up the weight to 200 to say 250 gram. But if you want a single piece, such as like a folder or something like that, you want that to feel quite premium, or a brochure cover, for instance, then typically you would be looking at 250 gram to say 350 gram. Occasionally we've printed on 400 gram, if typically on a folder or something like that. And you want that to feel really good quality. So we would generally up the weights for pieces like that need to be a bit more sturdy. So the next thing I wanted to touch on is about colours and the differences in the print colour terms. So there are different print colour terms, and what generally gets banded together is CMYK, process colours and full colour. Essentially they're the same thing. So what it means is generally CMYK is what they're talking about. It's the primary colours that go onto the presses to print typically images, for instance. So the CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and the K stands for key, which is the key colour, which is black generally. So you would use this for the majority of your printing, especially in graphic design if we're doing brochures and catalogues and the like. It's generally printed in the process colours, the CMYK colours, and each colour is laid down through the printing press. So typically it is done in the cyan, magenta, yellow and black order. But some print companies do print it in slightly different order. But the ultimate aim is once that sheet has gone through the press, each colour is laid down, a certain percentage of that colour is laid down as it passes through the press onto the paper, and the end result is you get a photograph or an image that looks like a full color image, basically. So that's why, like, if you're speccing a print job, you would generally say for most print jobs that I want it printed full color or CMYK. The printer will know what you're talking about. So other than that, you can print in spot colors as well. So that's where they would put a specific color ink on the press. So that ink color could be typically a Pantone matching system color, and that color, once printed through the press, would just lay down that individual color. And that could be typically, we see it sometimes where the colors can't be achieved using cyan, magenta, yellow or black, and it might be quite a vibrant hue of that color. So typically it might be an orange, a very vibrant orange, let's say almost like a high vis color. So you can't achieve that really through the cyan, magenta, yellow and black process. So you would typically use a spot color to print that color. Now what you often see is a combination of spot colors being applied with the cyan, magenta, yellow and black. So the sheet would go through the press using those full colors. And quite often these presses have at least 5, 6 or 7 or 8 color heads on the presses. So the sheet might run through cyan, magenta, yellow and black, and then you can add the spot colors in the same pass. So you might add typically a Pantone color or a metallic ink, let's say, through on the press at the same time, and once that sheet goes out the other end of the press, all those colors have been applied. So that's another advantage of using spot colors. I just touched on it there as metallic inks. So metallic inks are great if you want to try and get metallic look and feel. Typically the most common ones are obviously silver and gold. But there is a multitude of Pantone metallic inks that you can use, all various shades. Some look more metallic than others. And what you can do if you don't find in the metallic inks profile, you can actually, in the print finishing section, you can use hot foils. So this is a process that's applied at the end. So once the sheet's been printed, you can then have foils applied to that sheet, which are literally using very thin layers of metal. So like your tin foil basically, but much, much thinner, and it's applied via heat process and stamped into the sheet. So sometimes you will actually feel, if you run your hand over the foil, you will feel like a slight deboss, like an indent in the sheet. So yeah, that's another technique altogether. But typically, as I say, the majority of the printing that we do is full color process, CMYK. And if you want additional colors, such as metallic inks or very vibrant hues, then you would have to print either spot colors individually or in line with the process printing process itself. So finally, just to recap, print is not dead. It's just how you use print, and it's very good in the multimedia mix in combination with your digital content. Print, as I mentioned earlier, if you want higher retentions of people trying to remember the information that they're given, print is the best medium for that. So I would certainly add it into your marketing mix if the budget allows, or you can use it individually. It depends what kind of marketing message you're trying to get across and how you want that message to be delivered. So certainly don't disregard print. We use it a fair bit. And as I say, with the digital content that's out there at the moment and people getting screen blind, and the fatigue that surrounds being on the screen all the time, is actually nice to receive a piece of print. So we would highly recommend it as part of the marketing mix. One other thing I just wanted to mention is that I've noticed in particular that as designers are coming through into the industry, that less and less designers are learning the print side of things. So they might come in typically with a background of the understanding of print, and the understanding of typography and everything associated with graphic design. But because they've now started their careers in purely doing digital work, we're now finding that that the print knowledge is disappearing. Setting jobs up for print is becoming an art. That's certainly something that I've noticed, especially when liaising with other agencies that we work with, and other companies even that we work with in-house teams, for instance. And their digital knowledge is really good, but their print knowledge is lacking. So that's certainly an area that I feel that a lot of designers could brush up on. Is print is not dead. It is certainly a useful avenue as part of the marketing mix. But having the knowledge within that sector and how to design for it certainly seems to be waning, but should be revived.